Welcome. On behalf of the Friends of the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, we respectfully acknowledge that the ground on which we stand are traditional Miami and Shawnee lands. We extend our esteem and gratitude to the indigenous people who call this place home. And I do want to thank our sponsors for the Power of Voice discussion, and that is School Outfitters and Heinemann Auctions. And you can find more information about them on our website. So, with that being said, we're going to get started with our program for tonight. And Dr. Getz and Dr. Frey are here to talk about the story within the story. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, John. What do you have to say?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, let's put the timeline up and start with that. It's shorter than usual tonight because it's all about Harriet. She's our only subject, and we got a little bit of history of slavery and the slave trade early on in the timeline, but I'll skip over that. Most of you are familiar with Harriet's birth date in 1811, but at the age of 16 in 1827, she begins teaching rhetoric and composition, much like Renea Frey today, although it's probably very different, teaching rhetoric and composition at her sister's Hartford Female Seminary. Her sister Catherine founded that, and Harriet studied there and then became a teacher. They moved to Cincinnati in 1832. 1833 is a date I didn't put in there, but I realized I might have, because that is the date when Harriet, now living in Cincinnati, went across the river in the summer and witnessed a slave auction in Washington, Kentucky, which forms the basis of the slave auction in one of the chapters that we read tonight. Skip down to 1851, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harriet begins writing it for the National Era and then publishes it as a blockbuster book the next year. And soon after the publication of the book, in April, just a few months later, Frederick Douglass delivers his famous speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July." And so I put that in there just so you could see the context of the anti-slavery movement developing at that time. Douglass, you might think, after listening to George Harris's speech when he's talking to Wilson, that Frederick Douglass stole the idea of what to the slave is the 4th of July from him, but in reality, that was a pretty common topic among anti-slavery writers at the time. William Wells Brown is another one who in 1847 brought up that same issue. She wrote a second anti-slavery novel that is less well-known than Uncle Tom's Cabin, Dread, A Tale of the Great Dismal Swamp in 1856, and some people feel the ending of that is more satisfactory than the ending of Uncle Tom's Cabin. You have to read it to find out. In 1862, we know that Harriet challenged President Lincoln in print over Lincoln's famous statement that preserving the Union is more important than abolishing slavery. He said, "I would abolish slavery if it would save the Union, or I would save the Union if I would accept slavery if it would save the Union." Harriet reversed that and said, "No, my priority is getting rid of slavery, whether it involves breaking the Union up or keeping it together." Pretty gutsy statement there in September. And then just a few months later in December, here she is meeting with Lincoln, presumably to lobby for the Emancipation Proclamation he has proposed signing on January 1st. This is the time when people thought that he said, "Are you the little woman who wrote this big book or the book that started the big war?" Well, we don't know that he really said that. In fact, we don't know really what they talked about when they met at the White House, other than that Harriet seemed to enjoy the visit, she and one of her daughters who was there. And then the timeline ends with it in 1863 with Lincoln's signing of the proclamation, and Harriet Ralph Waldo Emerson and many other people meeting in Boston to await the word that signing had taken place, and then to celebrate. It was at Music Hall in Boston. And then Harriet's, and then the Civil War, that was in the midst of the Civil War. And of course, Harriet's son, soon after that, is wounded at the Battle of Gettysburg. That's the end of the timeline. Harriet lives on until 1896 and continues to write. But this is kind of the end of her period of writing and activism against slavery. So that's where I'm stopping and turning it over to Renee to talk about a word probably many of you have never heard.
All right, so I am going to share something here with you to talk about this word. This is one of the reasons that Harriet Beecher Stowe is of such interest to me. I study 19th century women writers, but also speakers. Let's see, I can't screen share. It says host disabled.
I think Chris has this as a possible screen share.
Well, I actually have a slightly different thing that I was going to show.
Oh, okay.
Okay, give me just a second.
So yeah, give me one moment. Yeah, it's a little, just so that it was a little bit easier to follow along with this idea. But anyway,
Okay,
I will
you should be fine now.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you. So yeah, this is really short, but it just kind of puts it in a way that's easier to see here. So, all right. So there is this voice, or sorry, this word, parrhesia. It is one of the images here that I often use to illustrate what this is of, the tank man here, but you'll see why. This is a word we often don't use a lot anymore. It's a Greek word. It's free or frank speech, and it has its roots in ancient Athenian democracy. So there was this idea that this is something that is necessary for a functioning democracy. It is risky speech. So it's a type of free speech that is also risky speech or action. So, again, someone can be enacting parrhesia even if they don't speak, as we see here with Tank Man. But it can also be in speech, it can be in writing, etc., as long as there is risk to the speaker involved. So it involves this idea of danger, whether that is to the status quo. It is often someone or a message that is going against the common wisdom or practices that are currently happening. It is, as you can imagine, not pleasing to all audiences because it very much does challenge what is happening in ways that not everyone wants to hear. This tends to be founded in these deeply held truth values so that people who do this, they feel this duty to speak truth to power. So this particular type of duty and speech involved in parrhesia was seen as being integral for society to function in a democracy where people need to be willing to speak up if they see things happening that are wrong, that they see as going against the values of their culture. So I want to draw attention just to two phrases in this particular letter. So you first, and there's two sentences in a row. So here you see her talking about this reticence. So there is, of course, women at this time it was not an approved practice to sort of speak up, especially publicly. That is also why sometimes women wrote as opposed to speaking in public, but still sort of speaking about political issues in the public sphere was very much frowned upon. But as she says here, even though she has this reticence, there is this time that if you can speak, you must. So this idea of this duty to speak out, which is something that I think we see in the many ways and the many different types of arguments that you see in this particular novel. So I will stop sharing here. So that's kind of like my interest, and I want to just bring that word or that idea into play, because we don't really have a word for this in English. There isn't a direct corollary even in Latin, so it makes it very hard to speak about. However, with her background in composition and rhetoric and all the preachers she had in her family, preaching manuals still would reference parrhesia because it is referenced in Greek versions of the Bible, etc. So, but whether she knew about the term or not, this is something that we still see. It's something we can see every day and something that we still value, something that we kind of valorize and respect. So kind of with that, is it okay if I go ahead and transition to questions or thinking about some of the stories that we see within this story? In chapter 11, you see the story that George Harris tells to Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Wilson kind of, you know, there's some arguments that he makes at first, but eventually George is successful. And so I guess the question that I kind of wanted to start with is why? Why do you think this story is successful? What about George's story convinces Wilson to actually break the law and help him out when Wilson is clearly a very timid sort of person?
Well, I'll start. George's story is very heartfelt. You know, he's speaking from his heart. He's not just talking about some theory. And Mr. Wilson knows him. I felt that made the biggest difference. Because he knew him as a person. He wasn't just, you know, if Mr. Wilson had met George there in the tavern and, you know, gone up to the side and just had this discussion with him, he probably wouldn't have reacted the way he did, because he wouldn't have had the I don't know the word to use, the idea, the connection to George as a human being. He would have seen him as a slave that was not necessarily human, because that's the general understanding at the time where he was. He was different because George had worked for him, and he knew George as an employee, as someone that he knew his family, he knew all of those things. And so his stories made sense to Mr. Wilson because of all those other things.
I would say that the introduction to that chapter, George is really gutsy, right? He's courageous as hell. I mean, he's taking a risk. He's pretending to be somebody he is not. And thank goodness nobody notices that, except Mr. Wilson, maybe at the time. It's confusing to me in the writing that he knows that Mr. Wilson knows, or that somebody calls Mr. Wilson into his room. But the respect that Mr. Wilson must have had for that trickery and that courage, I'd say, a heroic step he was taking, I think was also very persuasive. I think that, in fact, I found in all four of these stories that John assigned, all of them have a very strong aspect of somebody acting out of the normal and very heroic and courageous. In every one of them, there's a strong, risky hero in every one of the chapters. I don't know, John probably all figured that all out, picked them that way. But I would say that after you've seen that the arguments just become persuasive, because you have to say this man took such a risk to do all this, and then the arguments become more convincing.
And that's the thing with Perhesia. It's often talked about as an ethos of courage, because it does take so much courage to do something like that. And it does then create a particular kind of ethos for that speaker.
Everybody know that term ethos or ethos? Rhetoric.
Yeah, that's one of those, like, if it's a term that means basically the credibility of the speaker, how their authority, the level of trust that the listener or audience has for them. So yeah, that's the general definition there, if it's not a familiar term. So I'm trying to think some other things here. So I'm hearing like he knows him already. It's that courage. What are, if you, one of the other questions we had even thought about is like, if you were in that position, in that time and place, would that have been convincing to you? Did he give a good convincing argument that would have persuaded you to act in that sense, even if it went against, the law?
Well, one thing I always, told students when I had students back in the day, I would say things like, well, we all want to think that we would do the morally right thing, but would we have, based on everything else going around us and what, what our upbringing had been and what, this is what was normal kind of thing. So I'm not so the short answer is, well, yeah, of course I would be convinced. But I mean, I think he is really, there are some pretty compelling arguments in terms of the idea that there are compelling arguments in terms of the whole, it's your country, it's not my country. It's going back to that whole, Frederick Douglass and the 4th of July thing. It's like, I don't know. If somebody had come and kidnapped you, and I think he used the term the Indians, if the Indians had come and kidnapped you and made you work and blah, 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 wouldn't you like hightail it out of there as soon as you could? So, it makes these, he's hitting the right points in terms of, put yourself in this position, you wouldn't stand for it either. And so that's, I guess that's kind of where I was going, but I was going to go back just briefly. We don't have to belabor it, but I had never heard the term parrhesia before, but I am positive that Harriet would have, because she says her husband, Calvin Stowe, is rich in Latin and Greek and not anything else. So she probably had some Greek words floating around the house pretty familiarly. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm good for now.
I don't want to speak for Amy, but she put something in the chat here. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's seeing her comments here too, since she is not able to turn on the video or audio.
Yeah, that walking up and down the room, that he sat for a while and then he couldn't sit still. That's the way I read it. He couldn't sit still. He had to get up and walk around. That goes back to what I was saying about that he was talking from his heart. He wasn't just talking about some theory about something. This was something that he believed, from one end of his, from his toes to the top of his head, kind of thing.
Yeah, the line reads, this speech delivered partly while sitting at the table and partly walking up and down in the room, delivered with tears and flashing eyes and despairing gestures, was altogether too much for the good-natured old body to whom it was addressed, who had pulled out a great yellow silk pocket handkerchief and was mopping his face with great energy. So there's the emotional connection with the audience, with his audience. And the flashing eyes, Harriet seems very interested in the eye contact or the eyes of her speakers. You'll see it again with Cassy later on too. It's one of the things they tell you in speech class, make eye contact with your audience. And if you can make your eyes flash, I guess it would be even better. Marty? Did you want to say something? Oh, okay.
What I would say too, with Harriet Beecher Stowe having taught rhetoric, delivery is one of the 5 canons of rhetoric. And she taught, this is one of the things she taught. So I think it's really interesting how she shows that, since it's not a speaker standing there, she kind of describes what this would look like.
There was something else that I noticed in terms of kind of risky speech, was a lot of questioning of faith, questioning of the Bible by the enslaved people, particularly in the backdrop of all the, the Bible was the most popular book, right, besides Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that's seen in all 4, well, at least three of the chapters we read tonight. Something there to think about.
Yeah, there's an interesting exchange between George and Wilson about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody remember those?
I think there's something about, please don't use the Bible in that manner. Please don't use the Bible to support the idea of slavery as a good thing. That's offensive to me, that kind of thing.
And of course, it was used as a defense of slavery.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the things that I noticed, and I have to admit, I had a great deal of enthusiasm after our last meeting, and so I read the assignments at that point, but in the ensuing time, some of it got away from me. But what stays with me would be the status of women. I think I know he mentions, of course, his wife. I believe he mentions his mother, but he also mentions his sister.
Right.
And how she was sold into prostitution.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that was perhaps an affecting and effective influence on the man to whom he was speaking. I'm also wondering about the kind of the almost melodramatic presentation and the role and status of women within melodrama, that it was certainly a very emotional genre. And so the status of women might have had more precedence than in some other instances.
Yeah, and he even says, talking about, women, that even when he was seeing people being whipped and seeing so when he was so hungry, it wasn't those things that he was concerned about. What he cried for his mother and his sisters, because he didn't have anybody else to love him but his mother and his sister. And Harriet was very, very tied into, family and not having family. I just remember, Topsy kept saying, I never had a mother. I don't have a mother. I don't know what a mother is. I never had one. And so here's George, saying the only thing that was important to me was my mother and my sister.
And that's a consistent theme for Stowe, and it's true in the freedom narratives as well. one of the worst, maybe the worst evil of slavery is the way it breaks up families, severs relationships between parents and children, husbands and wives.
And the older, weaker ones as well.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, in this, looking back at this passage where he's talking about his sister, she was a pious, good girl. She was a member of the Baptist church. She was well brought up. And then she got sold down south. And, you know, I never saw her again. Now, we do see her again. I don't want to spoil a 170-year-old book for you, but we do see her again. And so it's like, but at the end of the book, it doesn't reference how she got there down south. It references after, you know, after she was in New Orleans, what happened to her and how she became a free woman after that. But so it's really interesting to, you know, reading through the whole book, I didn't remember this one little passage that, you know, referenced her when we actually meet her at the end of the book, if that makes sense. So, you know, it's just all these little setups of different characters. So she must have had like Harriet must have had like a list of who's connected to who and where are all they're gonna, how you're gonna get back to learning about them and all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is some extensive note taking. And they all have the same names, just like in her family. There's like 2 Georges and 2 Toms and 2, you know, it's like hard to keep track of all the people.
One of the things that certainly stays in my mind about Stowe is that she perceived herself as a painter. She was very focused on the image and kind of moving the image of one or other thing or person through time. And so I feel she keeps that consistency through the focus on the image.
And I think that the interchangeability of the names is a way of trying to say there isn't difference really between Black people and white people, or at least I think that's an implication. Whites have the same names as Black people. And at least in that side of Harriet, I think recognizes an equality, whatever, you know, she's got some other views that maybe don't quite measure up to that, but I think that's she's trying to show that these characters in some ways are interchangeable. It could be you know, as well as the character I'm talking about.
Yeah, and some of the and there was a Tom that was not a good guy, and there was Uncle Tom, and so it wasn't just, you know, that Blacks and whites were interchangeable, so to speak, were you know, deep down the same, but those that were doing bad things deep down, you know, I think she honestly thought that there was a way to convince, you know, Tom Loker, the bad guy, that he could be a good guy in some way. I don't know if that was conscious or unconscious, but giving all these people, you know, there's really like 5 Toms in the story, I think. I'm reading the annotated version, and they keep telling me, here's another Tom, and I haven't kept a list to keep track of them all, but you know, that's kind of interesting.
I think that also speaks to the theatricality of the time. I mean, theater then was the medium, pretty much the only medium outside of the novel. And so this interchangeability of role, or a focus on role, and who plays the role and what the role means, is certainly within, I think, that perspective. And also, for me, one of there's several fascinating things about Stowe, but one of them was the way in which, well, you know, they didn't have copyright laws at the time. So, you know, once the novel came out, or maybe, you know, and I'm not even thinking correctly, because the way the novel came out at that time was through serialization and not through a final publication. But it's kind of like almost immediately, the work gets translated for the stage, and then it dominates the stage. It stays on the stage pretty much unbroken for 75 years, and then it goes into film. But I think she picks up through that theatricality, kind of the aura and the zeitgeist of the times. And so, I mean, for me, I'm a theater historian. So this idea of how significant theater was and how dominating it was at that time, it just mesmerizes the hell out of me.
I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And all the different versions too. It's not like there was just one version.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then they split it up into parts. They had Topsy shows, they had Tom shows. I mean, it was, and then they had plates. I mean, to go back to the visuality of it, you know, I mean, it dominated so many different media. This one book.
Yeah, I find that very interesting, that you know, I didn't realize that in the 19th century there was, you know, merch that went along with books and plays. You know, you don't think about those things. You think about that's a 20th century, that's a 21st century thing, you know. No, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And photography was just coming into play at that time too. I think in the 1830s, 1840s, it starts to emerge, but it develops at a really rapid clip. But so many people were fascinated by it. And so, you know, we have the illustrations and, you know, again, the focus on the image through her ability not only to write, but to paint the scenes.
Yes.
Paint the scenes, the words.
One of the other things I think about is, you know, this was serialized in newspaper, and you know, the newspapers of the day were, you know, little tiny print, no white space. You really had to want to read it, to read a newspaper. And so to get people to really read it, she had to make it theatrical. You know, hadn't thought about it, that word, but that's really what she did.
Well, maybe we should move on to question 2, which is about the quadroon stories, Cassy's story, chapter 34. Some readers might say, well, it's just an excuse. This is a device for Harriet to tell another story about the evils of enslavement. Do you think that's true, or do you think there really is an organic reason in the novel for Cassy to be telling Tom her story?
I don't know, maybe in some ways, I mean, because this is pretty soon after he arrives at the Legree plantation. And I think she's kind of like, you know, this is the way it is here. And you're just going to have to get used to it and learn how to deal with it, because he hadn't really had to deal with that much mistreatment before. I mean, his mistreatment was not physical mistreatment. His mistreatment before was all emotional. And so the physical mistreatment is, you know, you've got to get used to it because that's the way it is. And I've dealt with it, and I've dealt with all these other things. And, you know, I'm a stronger person because of it. So you got to get yourself to that point too. So I think that's kind of background of why she tells him this story, maybe.
Well, I didn't see it that way. Again, I saw these chapters as very heroic people. And I see what Cassy's doing is a very heroic thing. She's taking a risk to help a person that she wouldn't normally have as much empathy for because of her story that she tells, because she's done a lot of trade-offs just to help herself. But she's now taken this position that here's a man that I don't know, can't quite figure out why she got this sudden empathy in her, and goes to help him at a tremendous expense possibly to her. Uncle Tom tells her that he can't do what she's suggesting because that would mean he will lose his humanity. And then she starts reflecting on her humanity right then and there and saying, well, I've lost some of my humanity too, and comes to a realization from the things that Uncle Tom tells her about you can't compromise and hurt other people you can't compromise and hurt other people. And she's done that. So it's a strange chapter. Right? I viewed it as strange. It's her stepping up right away as a hero, as a heroine, and then learning from Uncle Tom and helping Uncle Tom. So I saw it as a very heroic thing that she did, and I also saw it as very heroic that Uncle Tom was able to teach her she has to become a better person.
Why does she trust him with her story? Because some of the stuff she says could really be used against her, could make her look bad. Why trust this guy?
Right. I guess that's why I think she's a heroine here, because she's taking a risk by meeting with him and helping him. I guess, John, thank you for bringing that up, but I guess that's part of my seeing her as a heroine here, that she trusts him with this information, and she knows somehow he's not going to share it because he's giving her the lesson. You can't hurt other people. You can't turn them in for your benefit. You can't try to, make yourself better but at the expense of others. So he's giving her that lesson. And so you're right. I don't know why I just see it as a heroic moment for her, but I don't see, you got a point. I don't know why she becomes a heroine, a heroine suddenly.
Well, maybe in the chapter that I didn't ask you to read, we do see that Tom sticks up for a woman who is older and unable to fill her cotton basket, and
gives her cotton.
So he helps with that, and he refuses to beat somebody, to beat another enslaved person. And so Cassy has seen, she's sort of seen him in action, and there's a trust there, much just as, it's not as long an acquaintance as Wilson has with George Harris, but she's seen him in a key moment, and he wouldn't, he tried to help another person at considerable risk to himself. So I think there's some trust there of him.
This is Amber. And I'm wondering if she just felt like, and I'm glad that you gave us that background because I've forgotten so much of this book. I haven't read it all like in 1,000 years. But I wonder if she just felt like, I need to save this man, he's not asking me for any advice, but, I think just witnessing this abuse that he keeps, like you said, the abuse that he keeps experiencing. And I wonder if she's just trying to save him, just to keep from having to watch him suffer with, he's standing up for his beliefs, but she's just she just seems to feel like, like I just, like, let me, like, let me just try to tell you that, it's all bad and what you're doing is not going to work. So just stop doing it as a way to save him. So I don't know if she really meant, I mean, I guess there was some trust there. I'm just wondering if it was just definitely a bit more of, gosh, like this guy's just really stubborn and I need to try to help him. And that's it.
Well, do we know that she hasn't ever told anybody else this story? She says right at the very beginning when she goes into him that this isn't the first time I've been out in the night helping others like you.
Mm.
So maybe, and I'm just hypothesizing here, maybe she uses this story as a means to get others in that same situation to think differently about life. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know really whether she's told the story before or not. We know she has helped other people. I think in the context of the book, I would think that Tom is sort of a unique character. And Renee had talked about him as a kind of minister, which is a role he plays in the book, I think. We see him earlier leading the singing back on the Shelby farm for the worship service. And I think it's a kind of confession that she wants to make to him too. There's part of that, some of that aspect, that she sees him as somebody who will understand where she's coming from, what she's been through.
I'm sorry, this is Amber again. And I do like what you said about maybe she just had to let it out. I think I'm shocked that she admitted about poisoning her baby, that she would, even let that come out of her mouth. And I guess just for back then, we've read Beloved in here too. So of course it made me think of that. But for her to even admit that, like she was pushed to doing that, to try and save her child, I found that very shocking.
And maybe
Not the fact that she did it, but the fact that she explained that she did it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I wonder if she's maybe testing Tom by telling him that to see if he can take this, then I know he's going to be loyal to me. I know he's somebody I can depend on. If I can really share this thing that I've been carrying around all these years. I think there's maybe a kind of testing going on here, because she's got to know if she can trust this guy to cover for her and Emmeline. Is Tom somebody she can really depend on? She thinks maybe he is, I think, but maybe telling him this story is a way of trying to find out if he can really appreciate her, and if he's the kind of person who would indeed put his life on the line and conceal the runaway plan, the escape plan that she has, or if he's really going to be able to help her in some way.
And it does, the thing about the confession aspect of it is it does seem speaking this to him does seem to transform her. There is a moment where after she has told this whole story and he has still stayed so steady and so compassionate, that it talks about there was a graceful and compassionate sweetness in her voice and manner as she said this. It formed a strange contrast with her former wildness. So it seems like there's this transformation and this release after she has told this terrible story. And so I think that that was one of the things that I thought about too, with like this idea of Tom as almost a confessor or sort of a preacher, minister kind of stand-in, that he's been in other parts of the book too.
And he comes off better than some of the actual ministers.
A lot better.
And do you think that in telling the story, in confessing it, she sees that she's not evil? She's not, she's early on, she's talking about no use calling on the Lord, you know, he never hears, you know, he's taken sides against us, you know, everything is pushing us into hell. You know, I'm really a bad person. That's what I heard when I was reading that. I'm really a bad person. I must be, because I am who I am. I've done these things. And then she tells Tom, and she sort, like you said, her whole demeanor sort of changes, and she realizes that, well, maybe I can be forgiven. Even maybe the Lord won't forgive me, but maybe Tom can. You know, if he hears it and he still thinks I'm an okay person, maybe that changes her perspective on herself.
Okay, I don't actually like pay that much attention to the quotes at the beginning of the chapters, and now Amy is making me like rethink all that, because and she actually typed it in here. I was going to read it for you, but she typed it in from Ecclesiastes. Behold the tears of such as are oppressed, and on the side of their oppressors there was power. Wherefore I praise the dead that are already dead more than the living that are yet alive. And Amy said it reminds her of Beloved. Which is interesting, because the Margaret Garner, that had not happened yet when this book was written. That was 4 years after it came out in book form. So same, I mean, in Cincinnati, but the Margaret Garner thing was after this book was written. Yes, you did paste the right
Which makes this predictive.
So now I'm going to have to go back and read all the quotes at the beginning of the chapters and go, how does this relate to the chapter? There's just like so many layers here, right?
That's one good thing. That's one good thing about the annotated version. There's always a little explanation. You know, I'm enjoying. You know, I've read the book a long time ago, and I think I've told you, Christine. I'm in the process now of I listen to a few chapters, and then I read the chapters in the annotated and read all the little notes, and I'm getting a whole lot more out of it.
Did you get one? Did you pick up one of the big annotated Henry Louis Gates? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I need to. We're out at the moment, so I need to see if I can find some more. We carried those in the bookstore for a long time, and then they were out of print. So I've been picking them up at a used online used bookstore, and finding them that way to carry a few in our bookstore, because people like having that level of analysis, thought, whatever. Yes.
Some of the annotations I kind of go, I don't like that.
Okay, no, that one not so much, but a lot of them.
But some of them show me something that I've missed, you know. So.
Another thing, could somebody give me like their interpretation of this Bible verse? Because I'm not quite.
So, I mean, it's almost like, you know, the people who are being oppressed, their tears they're really their ability to see what's going on is in some ways makes them more powerful than the people who are doing the oppressing. And, you know, if you already feel like you're dead to the world, then you can't really be hurt anymore. Maybe. I'm not good with Bible verses.
Okay,
Maybe I
thanks.
should stop.
Or maybe it's saying that you're better off dead.
Yeah.
Dead or better off than the living if the oppression is so terrible.
I think it also calls into question the idea that might makes right. You know, this also shows that oftentimes the people, those who oppress, are the ones who have the power. And so to kind of, I can't help but see things through that, like the sort of pushing against power in some of these things as well. So do we want to talk, should we move to the other question about like comparing these two stories? So we kind of looked at these two stories. George and Cassy tell very different stories or different styles. But what things do they have in common? What are some of the things that these two different stories from two different characters have in common?
One thing they have in common, to put this in the phrasing of what we just looked at, they are both the children of power. They are both in between the worlds of black and white. So they occupy an intermediate status, which may or may not give them, I think George, thinking about power, I believe George has more power than Cassy has, but I may be wrong in that, but that's my perspective on it, that they, and also in the 1850s, there was certainly a lot of concern about the number of, quote, mulattoes, the number of mixed race people, and certainly it was not a status that they themselves had created. It was one that had been created by others through and for them. But the for is very questionable because they didn't always get much benefit out of it.
So there's this sort of commonality in their status. Do you think that maybe makes them more relatable to the readers, or, you know, some other ways maybe too that they have kind of, you know, it's hard to talk about sort of privilege and slavery or anything like that, but they at least within the story, they're sort of given this different, like you said, an intermediary status.
Yeah, I mean, I guess generally we think of black and white as opposites. And somehow, you know, that opposition, reduced is not the right word. And mitigated is not the right word either. It's muddled. Maybe I'll say it's muddled through their status, which makes it difficult for them, but also might give them more possibilities. I think of George and how he positions himself and presents himself as a Spaniard. He moves outside of being American through what has happened to him genetically. But it's hard for me not to think about the ending of the novel and how Stowe herself banishes or seeks to banish those of, quote, intermediate status. And then there's always dear
Would
old
you,
good brother.
Barbara,
Yeah.
what you just said, would you elaborate a little more on that? You know, yeah, just a little bit more. I'm confused about what you mean, how she seeks to remove their status.
At the end of the novel, doesn't she make the argument that, you know, the educated kind of mixed blacks should be banished to Africa? That's what I meant. That that their position is so problematic within this very stridently divided world, that their presence is antagonistic. At least that's my reading of it.
Well, that ending, Marty, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say she listened to her father too much.
You what?
She listened to her
father too much?
Her father
The
wanted to send all the slaves back to Africa. So
Colonizationist. Yeah, that ending was very controversial even in Stowe's day. She was attacked accused of being a colonizationist, which she denied, and said, this was a year or two later, she said, if I had it to do over again, I would not send all those people to Africa at the end of the book. And by the slight spoiler here, at the end of Dread, the novel she wrote a few years later, big long novel, but when you get to the end, nobody goes back to Africa at the end of that book. And I'd say back, they were all Americans to begin with, but nobody is sent to Africa at the end of that book. Some people go to Canada, some people settle in free states in the North, but I think that was her way of sort of trying to make amends for sending, and it isn't just the mixed race characters who go to Africa. Topsy goes to Africa too as a missionary by the end. And that caused a lot of people to say Stowe is betraying the cause. She's turning out to be a colonizationist, and it was hotly debated. And she was attacked for that. Douglass defended her. Frederick Douglass defended her. He said, whatever you think she was in the book, and on the whole is helping us a great deal. And he thought her heart was in the right place, even though, you know, he probably wasn't too excited about the ending either. But that's a controversial issue and an important one to address when you're trying to evaluate the book as a whole.
She also mentions, you know, in several places too, George and Cassy are both, they've had educational opportunities. And so there is also these ways that it seems that she makes their stories or makes their backgrounds or more relatable perhaps to readers. And I'm curious, like sort of what that role of these other, you know, you had talked about like that in between status and that different type of status, and whether sort of these opportunities for education, et cetera, like are part of that.
Absolutely. Certainly. One of the reasons I'm here is because I'm working on a play in which Stowe is a character, and it involves a woman named Mary Richards, who was African-American and had been sent north for education and then sent to Liberia as a missionary. And she hated Liberia, and she comes back. And what some of those things mean. Also that Stowe, subsequent to the Civil War, buys a plantation. She buys a plantation in Florida, where she spends, and you had alluded to it, John, to some extent when you mentioned the son who was wounded at Gettysburg. She bought it for the son initially, for him to recover. And then she buys another one for herself and for Calvin Stowe. But for me, that kind of, and in a way, let me not go any further, because I'm taking the conversation farther afield than it needs to go at this point. But she's just a fascinating personality, lots of contradictions.
Yes.
This is Amber, and just learning about her views about what should happen to like educated or like the lighter skinned Black people. And it's making me think of, it's like, how is that kind of attitude that she has different from when that one man, slave master, in conversation with someone said, you know, I don't prefer the smarter slaves. Like if they're getting too smart, I'll sell them down south. You know, like they're too much of a problem. And so it's like, you know, so this man wants someone that he can really control and make, you know, have the slave work to his, to his satisfaction. But if they get too smart, you know, he felt like they're not even worth it. Just get rid of them. And so with her feeling like, you know, like these people are a problem, you know, or they create a problem, it kind of just feels like it's a similar attitude, like, you know, like just get rid of them. They cause too much of a problem being educated how they are. Like they make things more difficult. It just kind of seems similar to me in a way.
Well, that certainly is, you know, kind of an argument that many of the kind of Kentucky area slave holders would have had. You know, I could just sell them down south kind of thing. But Harriet herself, I think, thought vastly differently about education for African Americans. You know, after she did move to Florida, one of her main charity kind of, you know, I give money to this cause, was to set up African American schools for formerly enslaved children. And she also, and I'm looking at in the concluding remarks, the last chapter of the book, and it talks about, you know, that, you know, the writer has lived, she talks about herself in the third person, but she's lived on the frontier line of this slave state, and observation among those who were formerly slaves. They've been in her family as servants and in default to any other school to receive them. She has in many cases and had them instructed in a family school with her own children. So she was educating African-American children living in her neighborhood here in Walnut Hills. And then, you know, the other thing that she says is that the first desire for the emancipated slave is for education. There's nothing they're not willing to give or do to have their children instructed. And as far as the writer has observed or taken the testimony of teachers, they're remarkably intelligent, quick to learn. So I think her argument, her personal feelings are very different than the feelings of, you know, slave holders in Kentucky or other border states. Or maybe, you know, well, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Since I'm on this Zoom from Jacksonville, and that's where the plantation you mentioned is, just on the other side of St. John's River.
Right.
Just to clarify a little bit, that right on that same plantation is a school that still exists, was built for the education of African American children. So it's got a connect. Of course, the plantation is right on the river, and it's a plantation that was used for citrus transportation out to the ocean and distribution. But she didn't use it that way. She lived there for her son, as I understand. But just to clarify, it has right there on the property, you can visit the park, and it's got the original school that is there for the African American children.
There were two plantations.
Yeah.
One was bought for the son, And the second one, the Orange Grove one, which you're referring to, was
Yes.
bought for herself and Calvin Stowe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
So I haven't read the end of the book recently. So when she talks about the former slaves going back to Africa or going to Africa, does she put it in the terms of we've got to get rid of them because they're troublemakers?
No.
Or does she put it in the terms of they're never going to fit in here because they're not going to be accepted, so they need to go somewhere else to be accepted? I'm asking because I like I said, I haven't read it recently.
well, we learn about that in a letter that George writes explaining why he is choosing to go to Africa. Basically, he's giving up on the United States. He did, and I think this is maybe a side of Harriet that she sort of suppressed by putting in the mouth of George a kind of despair almost that we were going to deal with the racial issue, the slavery issue. And I think George has given up. He said, I can't get justice here. I don't want to raise my kids in an environment like this. I'm going someplace where I'll have a say in the government and in the society. And so it's his choice. And she,
Yeah, I mean, because we're obviously reading it from the perspective of knowing what happened in 1863 and how the war turned out. She's writing this, 10 years before the war started. So she doesn't know how it's going to end.
she doesn't even know there's going to be a war.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Slavery could go on forever
Yeah.
from what
Yeah.
she, unless she writes this book and has an effect on it.
Yeah, that's right.
But I wanted to come back to a point that I think it was Amber, somebody made about that person who said when the slaves get too smart, I ship them down the river. That's said by somebody that Stowe clearly discredits. It's part of that dialogue in the Kentucky Tavern that maybe we should
Yeah.
talk about for a little bit, where they're talking about the nature of slavery. And he's a coarse-looking fellow who says this from the corner. He's described as somebody pretty disreputable and unattractive, contrasted with the Kentucky drover named John, who takes, I have to put this in big quotation marks, a more enlightened attitude toward the enslaved people on his farm. He says they could leave any time. It's okay with me. And I've written free papers for them in case I die. And he takes on this guy who says, ship them down the river, saying, yeah, well, you treat them like beasts, they might act like beasts, but they're human beings and you can't get that. It's hard to get the humanity out of them, he says. So it's an interesting dialogue they have about the nature of slavery. There are these two discussions about slavery that white people have about the fate of black people being enslaved. And strangely enough, this Kentuckian, John the Drover, as he's called, he appears in both conversations, both the one in the Kentucky Tavern and the one on the riverboat where the two women are talking. And the clergymen show up. He's there too. I don't know what he's doing there, but he shows up in that discussion too. So what do you make of him with his different attitude? Why would Stowe put a guy like that in there? This Kentuckian, and he gets into the discussion with the clergy as well, preferring the guy who is saying, love your neighbor, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, versus the guy who's quoting the Hebrew Bible idea about that black people are the descendants of Ham and are an accursed people.
Well, I'm finding that
What do you
very
think?
interesting, not just him, but in general. If you think through here, there appears to be more slaveholders in the book that have a I don't know the word to use, liberal, not idea of slavery. You know, the Shelbys basically treated at least the slaves that we knew on their plantation relatively well. Of course, they were enslaved, but they treated them well. Sinclair, treated his slaves very well, and said he was going to free them before he was, he died. There's this guy who says, you got to treat them like human beings. Of course, we get to Simon Legree in the other side of the story. And there's others through, that are quote mean slaveholders. So I guess I'm just kind of amazed that she had so many slaveholders that weren't awful in the book.
I wonder if maybe Stowe's doing this so we can see all the different types of, maybe to just appeal to a broad audience or get the conversation going about, oh, slavery isn't awful, even though it is. But there's always this notion that, well, they're kind of like the Planter's Northern Bride, the idea that, the slaves in the South, like this idyllic thing that they're so well cared for, and it's such a, everybody's happy and that kind of thing. But maybe the Kentucky slaveholders are supposed to be, I'm not really clear on it either. Maybe it's just so people can empathize with all the different, in terms of painting, all the different shades of slavery, maybe. I mean, it's not just a simple thing, that's why people are saying, okay, let's go to Liberia. I mean, there's all sorts of different conversations going on, and maybe Stowe's just taking a picture here and a picture there, and just trying to get us all to, trying to get the conversation going about it, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Renee.
No, I was just going to say, I think she does that. She's good at sort of bringing in all the topical conversations of the time, but every argument, if you follow it to the end, it shows how slavery is still awful. So even the benevolent slaveholders,
Right.
There's still accidents that happen, and people families are torn apart and things happen. And so even when people are trying their best, it's still the institution itself is evil.
Right. And also that the institution, makes the slaveholders, it hurts everybody. I mean, everybody's a victim of the institution.
From like a perspective of sort of, if I think about this as like, well, if I sketched out the whole argument of the entire book, to me, she does such an excellent job of saying, here are the arguments, here's a counter argument to that. But it's not that simple. They're all woven through these stories and these characters. And so it's a very complex issue, but anybody who went into it thinking, well, maybe it's not that bad, they're going to they'll somewhere in here, they'll find the argument they've been telling themselves and see how that's not actually the case.
Yeah, they'll realize how foolish their point of view, might be, hopefully. I mean, ideally, I guess.
And even without using the term white privilege, I think she shows in that dialogue among the two women and then the clergyman on the top level of the riverboat, while the enslaved people are down on a lower level. It's white privilege. These people get to debate slavery. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And they both have their opinions. And even the woman who speaks against it, she's still got the privilege to do that.
I almost got the feeling that, how dare these people bring the slave trade on our, on our little trip down the river. How dare we have to look at this awful thing? We're Northern after all,
Yeah,
Should
it's
we have a
horrible.
freight boat for these guys or something like that? I mean, it was terrible. Yeah, they looked foolish.
I'm thinking about this, about the way she wrote this book. I find it amazing that, she wrote this as in serial. So it wasn't like she sat down and wrote the whole thing down and then said, oh, I didn't say something that I meant to say in chapter 5 and then go back and edit it. She didn't have that opportunity. She wrote it, one chapter at a time and got to the end and said, okay, we're here, we're done. And didn't have a chance to go back and weave all this stuff in there. She was weaving it in as she went.
Maybe that's why the ending might be kind of lousy. Because you just, it's kind of like sending an email off or, getting something published real fast. And then, oh, geez,
Hit send too fast, yeah.
maybe. All right.
She hit the send button too soon.
Yeah.
This is Amber. And it's like, given all the chapters and everything, it's like, wow, like she was, I mean, I know that writing was, what she loved to do, but this was just a lot of commitment, like how we've said about all the characters, a lot of them got the same names and, trying to keep track of everybody and how she was able to do this, with pen and paper and typewriter. I think it just shows like the level of commitment.
At that point?
No typewriters, not even then?
No, they didn't have
No,
typewriters then.
handwritten.
No, I thought she would have been able to use it. When did the typewriter come along?
Nope. Like a
I don't
decade
remember
later.
the year, but I don't think it was at that point. I think it's closer to I would say it's the end of the 19th century, but don't quote me on that because I don't really know. But that was my supposition.
I'm going to throw one more curveball. Not only was she writing by hand, she also had 6 children at home,
Yeah.
including an infant.
And a demanding husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
I
my.
just looked it up, Amber. The first practical typewriter was completed in September 1867. The patent was in June of 1868. So no typewriter.
No
no typewriter.
typewriter.
No.
Very, very good perspective on that. So yeah, again, writing all this just really shows like her level of commitment to, like I went, and like you guys are saying with the children and all of that, and still pressing on. Was really committed because this is a very big book.
And Amy says, and an inkwell on top of it. She wasn't writing with a ballpoint pen.
No.
Yeah.
But I also want to point out what it says here, and thanks to the person, Renee sent this, that the first commercial model was manufactured in 1873. So yeah, it's closer to the end of the century. I don't know when it goes into a point when, people are buying them on a regular basis, but it's definitely a late invention. And she was doing all of this and moving. She had to keep, because her husband kept moving from college to college. And I'm sorry to characterize him this way, but he seems like, honey, you do it kind of guy. and so she had to take that on too.
She always said she said that she was glad when he was off traveling because she had her life to herself. Yeah.
Yeah, she had to cater to him.
Yeah.
Well, and at least writing was like letter writing and things like that. That was something that was the type of literacy practice that was open to women at the time. And it was okay. That was seen as a legitimate thing to sit and write letters, at least, you know, and correspondence. So she probably just took up, I would have to say, a whole lot of her letter writing time with writing this. But you still even see all the letters that she wrote too. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
as somebody who I've practiced like the penmanship from that style, and I have fountain pens, and I write letters in this way for fun, but I do that and I'm like, oh my gosh, if I had 20 of these to write and then write another chapter for the novel and then take care of the 6 children, it's a lot.
We wonder when she slept.
Well, and she wrote it in a year too.
Oh my God.
You hear people now talk about, you know, that they took 10 years to write this book.
Yeah.
She wrote this in a year.
I was going to ask, how long did it take? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because she didn't start writing it until, you know, after the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, and it was finished by the end of 1851. So yeah, she wrote it fast.
Well,
Whoa.
it's 51 to 52, I think.
52.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, was it 52?
But it was just about a year, yeah.
Yeah, it was about a year. All right, so it is 8:23. Do you want to do kind of final questions?
I have a question, which once again, I may be jumping far afield, but I'm fascinated by this term you brought us, Renee, about what is it?
Parrhesia. I'll type it in the chat.
Is it becoming more important now?
You know, that's a great question. One of my, I would say it's always important, and it is an act that we valorize. We see it, you know, the way that people are talking about Ukraine right now and the people resisting. That's all parrhesia. We just don't have a word for it that everyone is used to using. So we can kind of point at it, but we can't name it and see how common it is and how important it is and how much it reshapes power. So that is kind of like, that is my lifelong goal, is to sort of get that word into the vernacular so that we can point at that more easily and talk about it.
Okay, so we all need to go on Facebook tonight and talk about parrhesia.
Hashtag parrhesia. Yeah,
That's right.
I can actually put in the chat too, potentially here. I might be able to attach just the little short piece that I.
It's 2 wordles.
Yeah.
So Barbara, I want to know, you say you're working on a play. Are you writing a play? Are you working on a play?
I've written the first draft of it, and I need to develop it more. Yeah.
That's exciting.
Very, very interesting. But yeah, I'm so glad that I've learned about this parrhesia word as well. Immediately, it made me think of like Black Lives Matter and all of that. And I just thought, wow, like there's a word for this. Like, I think like usually we think like, oh, that person, or, you know, when we think of certain reporters and what they report on, and we'll say, oh, like, you know, like they're really courageous or they're really brave or they're whatever. But there's actually a word for what they're doing. I just can't believe
you all are really convincing me that I really do need to write that popular press book about parrhesia.
Oh my God, it's up long.
Mayim Chayefsky, what is the guy on Dancing with the Stars? Make sure he gets in there too.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just typed it into my my phone and it spell checked it, didn't find it, and tried to change it to part tension.
Yes. Yeah. I had to add it to my computer.
Yeah, no, we have to champion that word.
I do actually have an article published about Greta Thunberg and Parrhesia
Yeah.
that's available
Okay.
online easily in an academic journal that's digital.
Okay, JSTOR through JSTOR?
No, it's open source.
Okay.
It is a journal that's specifically open source.
Yeah, good article. Well
Thank
worth your reading.
Just out of curiosity, there's actually an album by Animals as Leaders, never heard of the group, called Parrhesia.
Really?
Yep.
Oh,
I just Googled it and that came up. You've taught us a new word, Renee. That's good. I like learning new
Yeah.
things.
My evil plot, it's like everyone knows this word, so
you're good plot. You're a good plot.
thank you. My subversive plot.
Yeah, it's like our language can be so limited, just so limited. So yeah, that's really good.
Well, it sounds like maybe our last word tonight is Parrhesia.
Okay,
It's a good
Thank
word
you.
to take out into the world.
yes.
Thank
All
you for
right.
having me, everybody.
Well,
I really enjoyed meeting
Thanks,
you all.
everybody.
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Again, a very lively, exciting discussion. And just a little preview for next month's Wednesday evening discussion on April, whatever the first Wednesday in April is. Is that Du Bois in Washington?
Yes.
Okay. So we will be comparing and contrasting the Talented 10th and the Booker T. Washington Atlanta Exposition speech.
speech.
Yes.
1895.
Yes, which again, I used to teach to 10th graders, but it was, we read a very small section of the speech. But
Not that long, really. Read the whole thing.
they were 10th graders, so we read a small section. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. On behalf of the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, I wish you a good evening, and check out the links to the readings for next month, and go ahead and sign up, and we'll see you again then.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks
All
for a
right.
great
Thank you so
discussion.
Bye.
much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Renee.